as of now. I am Kathy Zook. I am the Eastgate ARC Program Manager for the Appalachian program. And today we are having our pre-application workshop. So thank you all for joining us on this beautiful sunshiny day. I know we have several agencies and individuals who have expressed an interest in joining us, which always excites me and makes me scared at the same time, because that means we have much more of a need that we can fill in Appalachia. So my goals today are to give you the tools that you need in order to complete a successful pre-application. Normally we have our meeting in person here at Eastgate, but with the pandemic, I get to see you as little squares on the computer screen now. Everyone is muted, and I would like to ask that you please stay muted unless you have a question, because we're going to have probably about 40 people on the call, and there could be some background interference. But please, this is a meeting for you. And if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself, ask your question, and then go ahead and remute. I will be sharing the screen and give you some information about the pre-application booklet that I'm sure you already have received because you're joining us today. That was sent in the email, but if by chance you don't have it handy, it is on the Eastgate website under the top news section. So that is the pre-application that I'm going to be reviewing today, as well as the instruction booklet is included in that. And then secondly is the fact sheet that it's just kind of like a front page back sheet that tells you a little bit about what ARC is all about. Just to give you an overview, there are 13 states that are in the Appalachian region, from New York to Mississippi, and in Ohio we have 32 counties that fall within the Appalachian region, and 4 local development districts are responsible for administering that program with our state partners through the Governor's Office of Appalachia, and then our partners at the Appalachian Regional Commission in Washington, D.C. So every year, Eastgate receives an allocation for our district, and it is my privilege to administer that program with our local, state, and federal partners. The Eastgate region is a 3-county district, which is Trumbull, Mahoning, and Ashtabula. And with that, we get an allocation generally of about $700,000 to $1 million every year to fund projects within our communities within that 3-county district. So even if you have applied for ARC before, the process changes year to year. So thank you for joining us so that you can get all the pertinent information that's needed so that you can be successful. Now, I did mention that Eastgate gets state and federal dollars for our Appalachian program. However, as the applicant, you are not able to select which pot of funding you are applying for. You don't have to worry about that. That comes from the responsibility of the local development district, which is Eastgate. So we're just going to call it ARC funding. Just to give you an idea of the timeline, it's a 2-phase process. There's a pre-application phase and a full application. And right now, of course, we're soliciting for pre-applications that are due May 11th. And then we'll move to the full application phase. That will be announced generally around August, September, and then that's when we'll work with you to put together those full applications. And in general, we know what our full allocation is around October, September, October. So the number of projects or applications we can fund is determined by 1, how well you score, and 2, what the amount of our allocation is. So this is the competitive route. Please feel free to stop at any point and unmute yourself and ask a question. Like I said, typically we meet in person, but we're not able to do that. And I just want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to fill out a completed full application or pre-application, say that. Let's start by saying, well, who's eligible? Pretty much the only direct applicant that we cannot allow is a for-profit entity. So if you are a municipality, whether that's a city, a village, or a county, you can apply for ARC funding, as well as our educational institutions such as school districts, vocational schools, community colleges, and universities. And then we also have what we call our public institutions such as port authorities and libraries, they can apply, and then our nonprofits. So in the audience today, we are well represented by all of those institutions that are interested in applying this year. So thank you. I'm going to go through the instruction booklet and point out some key areas. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay. Hopeful that you can see that. Okay. In order for a project to be funded through the ARC program, you have to meet one of our 5 goals. The goals are broad and they're intended to be so because we can fund a variety of projects. Our first goal is for economic opportunities. That is so that we can assist either entrepreneurs or existing businesses to create and retain jobs. And then secondly, we want a ready workforce. So with that, I mean a workforce that has the skills, education, and the tools that they need to secure good paying jobs so that we can reach parity with the nation. So those are projects that are your workforce development, maybe increasing access to healthcare, welder training programs, things of that nature fall into a ready workforce. And then we also want to make investments in infrastructure. So those projects would be water, sewer, whether it's extension or new service, and then access roads and also broadband, which all of us, during this pandemic of being at home and really has come to find that broadband connection can be vital, whether it is connecting with your doctors or your work, or even education for children and adults who are at home. And then we also want to fund projects that strengthen our economic development and our natural and cultural assets. So by that, what example would be Ashtabula, certainly the wine culture there brings up a lot of tourism dollars. And then within Trumbull and Mahoning County, we have a really great food culture prior to the pandemic. So a lot of tourism comes in to take part in our downtown areas, visit our restaurants and so forth there. Those would be examples of natural and cultural assets. And then 5th is projects that retain leadership and community capacity. We want to retain our best and our brightest here in Appalachia within our region. We don't necessarily want our kids to get educated and leave the region. So we want to strengthen the community capacity and leadership so we can retain our best and our brightest. Those are the federal goals. Of course, they're state goals and they always have to be a little bit different. That it is in your booklet here. They're very, very similar, and we'll touch base on that when we're starting to answer questions 6A and 6B. But in general, let me try to move my screen down here. I want to talk about the types of projects that we have for ARC. Really, there's 3 projects types. That would be construction, non-construction, and access roads. And in the ARC program, we really like projects that we can see, feel, and touch. So projects that, being constructed as a water line or a building and so forth, Also equipment and supplies, so tangible things. Those are what you can request funding support through the ARC program. And then as far as non-eligible projects, those traffic signals, flood mitigation, certainly public safety related, such as 911, road maintenance, and parking lots. Those are not funding projects that you can seek ARC dollars for. Every year or every few years, we get something regarding a parking lot, and I'm sure it's vitally needed, but ARC is not your match on that one. And as I mentioned too, this is a competitive process. So each application is scored. Our scoring criteria is listed within this booklet. That's on page 30 and 31. And in total, there are 200 points in your pre-application. And when you think of ARC funding, think of it as last funding in to fill a gap of an unmet need. So I know many of you in the audience today, you may not have a firm project, you have an idea, and hopefully this will help you hone in what that project may be, whether you come forward for a request this year or future years. But ARC is really funding that comes in at the end. You know what your project is, you know what the total project cost is, and you have supporting documentation to verify that. And you have maybe support letters for it. That's when you come to ARC and submit an application. So projects that have their funding committed and in place will score higher than a project that maybe is just applying for funding. So every point counts in this application. And in order to get to the full application process, you have to have a successful pre-application. We should know the ranking of all the projects submitted for the Eastgate District by July. So at that point, I will send an email to all of you, to every applicant who has submitted an application, I should say. You will see where your project fell within the ranking, and if you are being asked to come forward and submit a full application. You have to have the pre-application before you go to the full application, and it has to be upon request. So keep in mind, with your rating criteria, the commissioners within the county that you're submitting your project from, they have an opportunity to rank your project. So all the applications that come from Mahoning County, a project priority list will be sent to them, and they'll get a chance to look the applications over and comment and rank it as they wish, using whatever criteria they wish. So that is a component of the scoring process. So what I would say is, if you're going to apply this year, please make sure that your commissioners are aware of your project. And then also, the scoring criteria involves the Eastgate approval through our Technical Advisory Committee, our Citizens Advisory Board, and our General Policy Board. So you can see it's really a grassroots effort from all levels having input on the priority there. So that's on pages 30 and 31. There is a match requirement for projects for ARC. And keep in mind that the maximum that you can request is $250,000 on any one project. However, the match is determined by your economic status of the county, not your municipalities, but the entire county. So Mahoning County is what we call a transitional county that requires a 50% match, and at risk is Ashtabula and Trumbull, which is a 70-30 match. Now, Eastgate didn't determine what your economic status is. That we can thank Congress for, because every year they are responsible for determining what that economic status is for the Appalachian region. And some of the things that they look at is countywide, your level of poverty, level of unemployment, and per capita income. So for this year, the economic status as it stands is Ashtabula and Trumbull are at risk and Mahoning is transitional. All right, now let's go to how you're going to submit the application in the format that's required. This is a format that is strictly adhered to. There are no deviations that are permitted on this. It's a format that Eastgate did not create. However, all the 13 states use it. And if your application is not in the correct format, it will be returned for correction. But first, let me begin by saying the pre-applications are due electronically. Please submit them to me, to my email address on or before May 11th at 3 p.m. That is one complete PDF, no multiple attachments. So when you submit your application, it's one PDF that is complete. Once I receive it, I will send you an email confirming that, thank you, your pre-application has been received. So if you don't get that, send me an email or give me a call. So once we have your application, as I said, you'll get that confirmation email, but this is the format that you need to follow. It's two basic parts to your application. One is your project proposal summary, which is an interactive form. It's a 2-page maximum. That's on page 7 of this booklet. So I'm just going to scroll down to that. This is your interactive form. This is the form that you must use. Don't try to create your own. This is it. We tried to make it easy for you. It's included here. That's the 2-page maximum. Then you have the attachments to support your project proposal summary. Those are attachments A through F. And then, of course, the index pages, which are provided in this booklet as well, or you use that to separate the forms. So I think we've covered that. What I'd like to do now is go to the project proposal summary. This is what you would be completing. I'm not going to go over each and every one of these. What I will do is point out a couple areas that have significant points and or applicants struggle with. And so that would be answering 6A, B, number 8 is the budget, number 9 is the project description, and number 12 is your performance outputs and outcomes. So I'll review that in a little more detail, but let me just start with the title. Please make this clear and concise. We don't want a 3-page line of what the title is. Just if it's a water line extension, say that. If it's a construction project, say that. If it's for equipment, whatever. But short, sweet, to the point, and then consistency throughout your application. Every time you refer to your project, make sure you use the same title. And then also number 3 is your contact person. This is the person who is the first person I or someone from the state would reach out to. They are the most knowledgeable of the project to answer questions about the project. It's not necessarily your CEO or your executive director, unless that is the person that I would call to say, hey, I need you to change this, or can you clarify this? It is the person that we would reach out to discuss the project. Certainly there is areas that your CEO and executive directors are going to sign, but the contact information may be different there. The county designation, we just reviewed that as the economic status. And what I want to say about the basic agency, you really, in the pre-application, you do not have a confirmation of your basic agency at this point. However, I do want to make note, for construction projects receiving federal ARC dollars, you are required to have a basic agency to administer the project. There are a handful that qualify for that, and those are listed on page 8 of your booklet here. But really, I can just rattle a few of them off. rural development, EDA, Ohio Environmental Protection, the Ohio Department of Higher Learning, the CDBG program. If you are doing an educational project, then of course it's the Department of Higher Education. But if you're doing an access road project, only ODOT can be your basic agency. They can't be a basic agency for anything else. If you are a construction project, in order for a basic agency to agree to administer your project, then they need to have funds in the pot that you would list in item 8. What I would say is, thank goodness, Ohio, as of 2 years ago, became a self-certifying state, so we can take on that role as the basic agency. I just want to kind of give you a heads up on that it would be a requirement at the full application level, so we really don't have to worry about it right now. If you have any questions on that, feel free to give me a call. Now I'd like to move to number 8, which is the budget and funding. And I'm going to scroll down to page 8 in the application booklet just to kind of bring attention to that. Okay. Because this is where there's a lot of points, and help you out with that. So here in the budget section, you are going to identify your funding sources, the amount they are contributing, the percentage of that in the total project cost, and the funding agency in which is supplying money for your project, and also the status of funds for that. You know, I'm sorry, I missed a section. That was regarding the 6A and 6B. That's for your goals and strategies, because a lot of applicants get that. So before I talk about the budget, let me just, I want to show you that when you are answering the 6A and 6B, which is your state goals and your federal goals, that's on page 15. That's where it starts on this pre-application instruction book. So I'm going to just go to there real quickly. When you're completing 6A and 6B, this is just a copy and paste. So say you are choosing goal 2 is the best for your project, and maybe 2.1 as the Ohio strategy, or you could be 2.1 to 2.7. You can only pick one strategy. So you're just going to highlight the strategy, highlight the goal, and paste it in there. That's it. Don't put any other narrative, don't put any other information. All they're asking for is the state goal that fits your project and the state strategy. And then also the same applies for 6B, which is the federal. And that starts on page 22, and same thing. So copy and paste, no additional narrative. Be surprised, a lot of applicants try to give us more information there. We don't need it. Okay, so now I'm going to go back up to that budget, which is here, number 8. All righty. So for your project that you're requesting funding, whatever you're asking for in ARC dollars, please round it to the nearest hundredth. So in other words, we don't want to see $174,392 requested in ARC funds. You want to round that up. And in this entire section, please don't put any cents. We want whole dollars. Now, the other matching funders, whatever that number is, that's the number. That's okay. You don't have to round that to the nearest hundredth. But for the ARC request, yes, please round that to the nearest hundredth. I actually had a grant kicked back to me on the federal level because it wasn't. So that's why I'm sharing that with you. And again, 250,000 is your maximum request in ARC. Keep in mind though, if an applicant is requesting 150,000 or more, there's a possibility the amount of your request may be adjusted. Sometimes it happens, but just wanted to give you a heads up on that. Now, with the ARC program, we do encourage multiple funding sources. That actually is a application that has more than just the applicant and ARC funds in it. It's a little more point significance on that. So for every matching source that you have, it needs to be identified here. One line for each source, whether it's CDBG or a USDA grant or Ohio Public Works. So we're going to put the amounts, and then you're identifying that fund, and then the status of funds is very important because, as I mentioned, projects that are committed score higher than maybe apply or pending or will apply. So in this example, CDBG, the applicant hasn't applied yet, but they intend to, so they put the date. So if it's not committed, tell us when you're going to apply or if it's pending and so forth. For every matching source that you have to have corresponding documentation from them stating the amount that they are providing for your project. And that is actually in attachment C. We put that in attachment C. Now, ARC does allow you to use some in-kind as a match for your project. It's just the maximum you can request in in-kind is 20% of your ARC request. Not 20% of your total project cost, 20% of what you're asking in the ARC funds. I would like to say too that this is important, your total project cost, whatever that is, whatever that number is, when you are providing that documentation as attachment C, those two numbers have to match. So whatever you say your total project cost here is must correspond with what you provide in attachment A. Okay, I think we've covered that. Let's go to the project description. There are a lot of pieces and parts to this one answer, and every item is needed. So if you don't provide it, you're losing points. This question is the who, what, where, and when. So please, it says in the first sentence, this is what we want to see, this is what we want to see. Your first sentence tells exactly what the project is and where it will be located. So if you're, if it's that sewer project, you could say the sewer project in Vienna Township, that's where it would be located. Please don't be abstract with what your project is. Say exactly what it is, what you want to use ARC funds to purchase, whether it's equipment, construction, or whatever. Make sure you state who's going to own and maintain the project in this section, and be specific. So tell us, how many gallons is the water tower going to hold? How many linear feet are you looking? How many individuals are you going to serve? How many businesses are you going to serve? How many students are going to take place or incumbent workers? And then also we want to know your project timeline. We want to know the start date and the end date. And I will say this, make sure you give yourself a 12-month timeline from start to finish. Even if you know that it's going to take less, because unfortunately in the world we're living with, especially with the pandemic, projects that we thought were going to be moved through the pipeline quicker have not. So give yourself a little cushion, give yourself 12 months. That's one thing with Appalachian funding. Once you get that award letter, we'd like to see that money spent down within a year. This is a reimbursement grant, so give yourself a little space there. And then also regarding your answer in this section, when you're talking about that timeline, your start and your end date, make sure though that corresponds with what your supporting documentation is that you supply in attachment F. Also, if you could just make a quick note, a sentence or two of how this project will improve the conditions if you're successful in having it awarded. The last item I'll mention on this question is local support for the project. ARC wants to make sure that Your project is not just one person's idea. So if you have support letters from maybe area businesses or residents, your commissioners, your trustees, your state elected officials, maybe the regional chamber, and any entity that's in support of your project, please include a sentence of all those entities and then provide that letter of support in attachment B. Now, one thing I would say is at this point, I would not necessarily seek out a letter from your federal congressional representatives because we don't know if the project's going to be funded or not at this time. Okay, I think we've covered that. Let's move to number 12, which is your performance measures, your outputs and outcomes. This tends to give grantees a headache, but this is a format issue, strictly adhered to. No sentences in this section. This is merely bulleted, and you can see there's an example here that you will find on page 10 of the booklet that I'm referring to. That's what I'm on right now, actually. But for this, the outcomes and outputs, you'll find that on the guide to ARC project performance measures, which is actually on page 17. So I'm just going to skip to that quickly to show it to you. Oh, it must be 18. Pardon me, it must be 18. Here it is. Guide to performance measures. This is examples of outputs and outcomes. Think of it as outputs is the big picture, outcomes is a smaller subset of that. So giving you an example, last box on here, workers trained and workers improved. Everything in outputs is served and then in outcomes is improved. So you're doing a workforce training project, maybe you have 100 trainees coming in, but when you're looking at improved, maybe you say 75 are improved. And that's because we know of those who start the program aren't necessarily all those who end up ending or successfully completing the program. With that, I'll say all these definitions, that is on pages 19 through 22. That's to give you a little more information there. So for right now, I think that suffices. Let me go back up because we've got another example here. So if you're doing, say we'll do an infrastructure project, we're using the sanitary sewer as an example, and you are answering this section. You're going to bullet this out. Under your outputs, this one has 9,500 linear feet of sanitary sewer improvements. It's serving one low-to moderate income area, 83 households, 3 businesses are served, 3 commercial buildings served, and 2 communities, and that's Biennium and Brookville Township. So that's an excellent way to answer that section. Now we're looking at the outcomes. In this situation, most of the numbers are the same. However, we've got, on the outcome, we've got 1 improved health and safety to the region, and 16 jobs were created, 28 retained. I will say, if you're going to mention that you have job creation and retention, we need to have supporting documentation for that. And I'll go into that just a little bit further. Just know that we have those definitions for you in a couple places. Then say we're doing a workforce development project. You can see here, we are in the outputs. It's 1 development center construction, 10 communities served, 60 students that are served as well, 8 school districts, 20 businesses, and 15 organizations. This is the type of format that we're looking for when you answer the outputs and outcomes section. Okay, so hopefully I haven't totally scared you on this. That's the project proposal summary. 2 pages, and you can see where all the attachments fall. So I'm just going to go over the attachment section just briefly. But attachment A, as we mentioned, is your documentation that supports the total project cost, which is matching what you said your answer was in number 8, which is the budget. I think we've covered enough of that. If you have specific questions on that, let me know. I want to talk a little bit about the support letters, which is attachment B. And again, that was with corresponding with item number 9. You can have support letters that isn't necessarily a job creation or job retention. So whatever entity that you would like to show support, feel free to include that in this section. And if you're fortunate enough that an employer says this project will help create, maybe 10 jobs and retain 15, this is where you provide that supporting letter from that entity. Now, I mentioned the definitions. We have specific definitions as to what we feel job creation is, job retention. Temporary construction jobs is not considered part of jobs created. Some of the items here, 1 through 6, tell you what we're looking for in those support letters. Of course, it has to be on company letterhead, dated and signed by the appropriate person from that agency. And then for jobs retained, this is a very narrow definition. I want to point that out. You can find it here. With this, if an employer states that they're going to have, 30 jobs retained, then that has to state in their letter that the success of this project will mean that this person is going to keep their job. So if the person is going to keep their job, whether or not this project moves forward, very pleased to hear that. However, you can't count it as a job retained. Job retained only refers to an individual who's at jeopardy of losing their job because of closure or relocation. All right, and now then attachment 6 is your commitment letters for the match that I talked about, also for section 8 in the budget. And for this, just keep in mind, every line item that you identify as a funding partner has to have the documentation showing the amount that they're contributing and when they're contributing it. Then the memorandum of understanding that is in your booklet here, that's on pages 27 through 28. The appropriate person from your agency needs to sign that, and that's just showing the parameters of ARC. So just whomever that is in your agency that's responsible for signing it, please have them do that. Then attachment F, not every project has any mandates or non-compliance. That usually applies to an infrastructure product such as water or sewer, mainly sewer. So maybe you've got something under EPA that says you're in a failing septic area, or something from the Ohio Department of Transportation or Army Corps of Engineers, maybe you're in a flood zone, whatever, failing septics under consent decree. That's where you would put it here. And as I said, if you've got workforce projects, you're really not going to, this is not going to apply to you. So it doesn't apply to everyone. And then your timeline, here's where we want to know your start and your end dates, and just put that in there. So hopefully I've given you the tools that you need to answer these questions. And right now, let's see, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see a little more of you than just the few. So that is a pre-application, how to complete it in a nutshell. I'd like to open it up for questions. Feel free to unmute yourself. And before I go any further, I've had a lot of discussions with most of you, and you've sent emails to me telling me what your project is or the project you're trying to develop. So I do want to thank you for that. And I know we have lots of infrastructure projects this year, as well as we're looking at entrepreneurship. And specifically within Youngstown, there's been a lot of lots of comments about entrepreneurship. So I know I talked to Sharon Woodbury today, and also Barb, I know you're on the call too, Barb Ewing. Hopefully we can facilitate some conversation there. I think you guys might have some good partnerships because your projects seem somewhat aligned. So, I just wanted to pass that on. If we can assist in any way, certainly Eastgate will continue to do that. So with that, I'd like to open it up for questions. If anyone wants to unmute and ask.
Hi, this is Arnie. I have 2 questions.
Hey, Arnie.
I don't know if could you hear me?
Yes, I do. Hi, I can just see the top of your head.
Okay. Let me see if I can get down a little bit there.
Now I see you. Okay, great. What's up, Arnie?
All right. So 2 questions. One was on the relocation issue as a retention. If a job relocates, what if it's just out of the county to the next county? Does it have to be out of Appalachia? Let's just say we count relocation and the job's going to move to Mahoning County.
Yeah,
not state of Trumbull. Would that count as a retention?
Yes, it would, as long as that employer puts in their support letter that unless this project moves forward, this individual is going to lose their job due to relocation. You have to have that key verbiage in there. It doesn't matter if they're moving from Trumbull County to Mahoning County or from Trumbull County to Pennsylvania. A job loss is a job loss, and we don't want to see that.
Okay. And my other question is, this is obviously a pre-application, but how much can the pre-app change? How much can the full application change from the pre-app and still be eligible?
Yes, thank you for asking. It's actually, most of your work is done in the pre-application. The full application, all the pieces and parts that are used in the pre-application are in different segments, but they will be used in the full application.
So,
go ahead.
So can some changes be made if they're not significant from the pre-app to the app?
I'm glad you brought that up because I did forget one area of my notes. This is regarding the budget section, number 8. There's 2 things that I start to turn into this broken record, and you will hear me say over and over again. But once your pre-application is approved, section 8, which is the budget, an applicant is not permitted to change their funding sources unless they have the approval of Eastgate. So that is the first answer to your question there, Arnie.
Okay.
And then as an aside, the other broken record you're hearing me say is do not break ground or purchase equipment or go out to bid unless and until you receive an award letter for your project. To do otherwise, you will lose the ARC funding. This is a matching reimbursement grant, so you cannot incur the cost prior to the award if you want to get reimbursed for it. And Arnie, no, you cannot change the parameters of your grant without the approval of Eastgate.
Okay, thank you.
Because this is competitive. It's not fair if you submit for a sewer line project and then say, well, you know what, we're not ready to go forward on that. We want to do workforce development. That's not fair to the rest of the people that have submitted the application.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking.
Okay.
Hi, Kathy. I have a question. This is Stephanie from YBI. Can you give me an example of some ideas of what matching funds would be allowable? Is that salaries? Is that infrastructure? Can you give me an example for a couple of different types of projects?
Matching funds, ARC is very generous as far as what can be used as match. So you can use federal money. We are one of the few agencies that you can match federal with federal, as long as your project doesn't exceed more than 80% in federal funds. So we can, as I said, federal to federal or ARC with state. So that could be OPWC, CDBG, 629 funds, whatever state funding, even though our Department of Natural Resources. And then also you as the applicant, we can also match with what we consider private. So maybe that's a foundation or a nonprofit. You as the applicant, those are all things we can do. Now, I think you might be referring to in-kind.
That's my next question,
Okay.
in kind
Yeah.
as well. So I did have a follow-on.
In kind is a little more stringent. And with that, you can use professional time. It would be maybe the use of a room, so what you would charge for housing. And then also we would look at donated land. So maybe the section of land is worth $50,000. You can use that as match. Also maybe a large piece of equipment that was purchased, a portion of that could be used as in kind. So hopefully that gives you a professional, I think you said salary, so like instructor time or professional time, you can use that as well.
So if we have a purchase of a larger piece of equipment and we would like to add on the supporting pieces for that piece of equipment to, complete out the purchase price, can we use the initial purchase of $500,000 towards as the in kind as the match?
We have to look at that a little more. What we're thinking there is like you purchased an expensive piece of equipment so that maybe the students or workers could use it in the facilitation of training skill. You could use a portion of that cost offset as match for the project, up to 20% of your ask.
Okay, got it.
In kind sometimes can get a little crazy. It's not as straightforward as dollars, but certainly we can work with in kind also.
Kathy, JP, I have a question. So on the project cost estimates where it said you needed an engineer's estimate, so that's something above and beyond getting a quote from a provider. I'm thinking like broadband. If you wanted to complete a broadband loop or do a broadband extension, you've got providers out here that could give you a cost to do that. They may not necessarily be the ones that were awarded a bid. You have to put it out to bid, but will that suffice as the cost estimate if it's coming from a provider, or does it have to come from an independent engineering firm to get that estimate for the project?
The professional engineer cost estimate usually refers to a water line or a sewer line. Regarding broadband, generally for the Eastgate allocation, that is inline service, or I should say a construction portion. So that may be conduit or, fiber. I'm not sure I understand what you mean about loop, but
So I'm sorry, like for a loop, like we've got 3/4 of a broadband line, but it doesn't connect, so it like ends. And we were talking about finishing the loop. So if you got the quote from a provider to finish that loop, now it may go out to bid. Somebody else may say, well, we want to build it, and then we'll charge a rental of the line, but to the other company or whatever to finish it. I understand we can't pre-select who the winner of the award is. I mean, it still has to go out to bid, but for the standpoint of getting a cost estimate, we can just basically take a quote to complete the construction from the provider, and that's sufficient. We don't have to go out and hire a professional engineering firm or something to get that cost estimate, correct? You could get it from the
Right.
actual provider itself.
Yes, you are correct. We don't want you to incur any additional costs that's unnecessary. As you
Okay.
described from the estimate that you have now, from it wouldn't be sufficient to put in to your pre-application.
Okay.
It does not obligate you to use them, and as you said, you cannot choose a provider prior to going out to bid.
So in this situation with us, like to complete the loop is owned by one provider, or is basically, they have the rights to use that loop. So it's not pre-selecting them, but that's the loop that the county is on, where we get our broadband service from. So, I mean, does that pose problems at all? I mean, that's what we're trying to get that completed so that we have redundancy. Because what happens with us is if there's the line gets cut because they're doing a utility cut, or there's a lightning strike or something, everybody from that point to the end of the line loses internet. Whereas if we can complete the loop, they can reroute it back the other direction. But that's only coming from one provider. So, I mean, it kind of, we can put it out to bid, but it probably, the only one that logically makes sense to bid on it is going to be the people who own the rest of the loop.
From what you're describing, I don't see an issue with that, but we can confer with Mark DeFalco at the ARC office in DC, just to make sure, so we're not making any missteps along the way. Certainly in Ashtabula, we have been successful in doing broadband projects, fiber in the ground. We did that at the Ashtabula Airport. So I believe there has been a precedent. We can do it, and we'll help guide you through that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anyone else have a question?
Hey Kathy, it's Rachel. How are you?
Good, how are you doing?
Good. I have a question about how flexible ARC is with the timeline. So if an applicant has a very large multi-million-dollar project that has several agencies with funding in that project, it can be difficult lining up the timeline for all of those agencies. And so I'm curious how flexible ARC can and will be if there's any issues with that beyond 12 months.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I really glossed over that pretty quickly when I mentioned it. We say we want to be the last in, but then the approval process can take a long time. And my apologies for that. We've tried to streamline that. So in the pre-application stage, which, is announced in March, we have them due May 11th. Then we're not going to full application till probably September. And then to get that application approved, depending on whether it's state or federal, that could be anywhere from April next year, 2022, goodness, where's the time go, to August if it's federal. So your timeline of award doesn't begin until you get the award letter in hand. So say it's state funding and you get your approval letter in April, now you've got 12 months to spend it down. If you get your award letter in August of 22, now you've got to spend it down by August of 23. We ask and encourage that you seek multiple funding sources from other entities, whether that's state or federal. And I certainly know, especially in trying to match us up with Ohio Public Works and EDA funding, sometimes that creates difficulty. So we try to be as flexible as we can. We can do an extension. I would start to get a little nervous if the extension is going to be beyond 12 months. The reason being, because if the project fails, then that money is lost to the district and we can't recoup it. But the short answer is we'll be as flexible as we can. I look at no more than a 12-month extension horizon from the time of your award letter.
And is that spin down the award, the ARC award, or to have the project itself completed?
That would be the ARC award.
Okay.
You may have multiple pieces and parts of your project. We're not going to ask that your project be completed because like you said, that might be a couple of year horizon. But the portion in which ARC is matching and utilized, we ask that to be completed within 12 months of award.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I believe I mentioned it is a reimbursement grant. So you have to, complete it, incur it, and then request the reimbursement. Okay. Any other questions?
I have another one.
Mhm.
So if you made an ask for 200 or 250,000, the max, will Eastgate evaluate it and say, look, we can't give you that full amount for the project, but we could give you 100 or 150, and you might have to scale the project back. Is that ever a part of this, or basically it's all or nothing? Either your project that gets funded at the amount that you ask for, or you don't get anything unless there's money left over then at the end where you might reach back out.
Yeah. As I mentioned, applicants requesting 150,000 or more can be at the discretion of the district, but that amount can be reduced. And
Okay.
with that, we wouldn't necessarily ask you to reduce your project or scale back your project. That would be your choice. Two options come into play there. One, you either find additional match to make up the difference for the shortfall, because maybe we just don't, it's a good project, but we don't have enough funds to go around. So it could be, you're last on the list there to be funded. You asked for 250, we only have 100,000. So we would say, well, we'll give you the 100,000. Can you come up with additional match at another source, or possibly scale the project back so that you can utilize it? But it would be the applicant can say no, the project wouldn't be funded, but
Sure. Okay.
we want to fund as many projects as we can. And so if we don't have the full amount, we'll give you what we have.
Okay.
And you can qualify, I should say give. Mhm. Okay, anyone else? All right, well, thank you so much. I know this has been, we've been sitting here an hour. I'm drinking a lot of water, so I'm parched, but feel free to reach out to me. I'm here to assist you and to guide you. Obviously, we're going to have more asks than we can fill. So even if your project is not successful this year, hopefully we can strengthen it for next year. And maybe if you came into the workshop not knowing exactly what your project was going to be, hopefully this has given you some ideas, but feel free to reach out to me. Eastgate is still remote, so we are not going to be back into the office until June 1st. Reaching me by phone can be difficult, but certainly email is good. And I will say, the last week in April, I will not be available. I'm not taking your call when I'm on the beach, but I will return the call when I get back. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. And I'll look forward to getting your applications. Okay, thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.